Why are rich countries rich and poor countries poor? This may be, alongside does God exist and where do we come from, may be the most important question of all. Some people are going to answer this question by simply saying what a rich country is, saying that people in rich countries earn more money. But that's not really an answer to that. Some other people are going to put the blame on like colonialism or some other form of exploitation, but that also doesn't really answer the question, because usually colonialism or these forms of exploitation happen after a country already is richer than the other one. So the question remains, why are some countries richer than others? Before answering the question, we need to examine the present. So why does a janitor in Sweden earn $2,000 a month while a janitor in Mozambique is going to earn $70 a month? This answer is very complex, and it definitely involves class struggle, but that's far from all of the answer. Even if Mozambique had 100% equality, they'd be very far from the $2,000 that the Swedes make. Probably lower than $200 a month. We hear all the time about how Africa's rich in natural resources and how it should be the richest continent. I hear that all the time about my country too, here in Brazil. But the thing is that usually doesn't make any country rich, not even companies, to be honest. If you take a look at the 10 largest companies in the world, with the exception of Saudi Aramco, which is the state-owned oil company of Saudi Arabia, there aren't many natural resource companies over there. It's Google and Meta and Taiwan Semiconductors. It's no mining and agriculture over there. So what makes Sweden rich and Mozambique poor is that Sweden produces more and more valuable goods than Mozambique, that produces less and less valuable goods. So how do you become richer? There are two ways. The first one is to produce more of what you already know, and the second one is to produce more valuable goods. Let's take one example. Mozambique has a very important fishing industry, but the thing is, the tools they use to fish are very inefficient. For example, as far as I can tell, it's fairly common in Mozambique to fish with sailboats, which make you lose a lot of time just traveling to get to where you're going to fish. One way to produce more and therefore become richer would be to buy a motorboat, for example. That would make you spend less time traveling and more time fishing. In the end of the day, you would have fished more. This is called investing in capital. Boats, nets, tools, these kind of stuff, they're called capital. Capital are the things that help you work more efficiently. Accumulating capital is extremely important in terms of economic development. So you see, Swedish fishermen, they're going to produce more not because they make more effort or work for longer hours. It's actually usually the opposite, but rather because Swedish fishermen have great boats that take them to deep sea and where all the fish clusters are, and they have these huge mechanized nets that fish tons of fish at a time, while in Mozambique they're going to fish with a small sailboat going 1 kilometer into the sea and fish with a meter-wide net. So hell yeah, they're going to be less productive. Of course, there are other factors involved, such as education, but the main difference between the Swedish economy and the Mozambican economy is that the Swedes are better equipped. They have more cars, they have better roads, they have better tractors, they have better tools. So all of the workers are going to have much better tools to work with. So yeah, they're going to produce a lot more. For example, Estonia has better educated workers than Denmark, or Russia has better educated workers than Switzerland. Same applies to Colombia and Portugal, but that doesn't make these countries any richer than the other ones. It doesn't really make a lot of difference if you're a civil engineer or an economist if the only option that you have to work is to go on a sailboat and fish with a meter-wide net. Maybe that's way too far away from your reality, but think Uber driver. It doesn't really make a lot of difference whether you have a degree or not if the only job option that you have is driving a car. So we've got to the conclusion that countries are richer because they have more capital, that is, better tools than others. But why is that? Well, there are millions of factors that go into this, but usually That's because their economy in the past has invested in more lucrative sectors. That's usually because the state has led them to this. If you take a look at, for example, the United States and England, they've taken very objective protective measures to their industry in the 19th century. A very good book that talks about this is Ha-Joon Chang's Kicking the Ladder. Take a look at it later. So 200 years ago in New York and London, rich people were investing in making clothes factories, tools factories, and what's the best investment in terms of a country's economies, investing in capital that makes capital, such as a machine factory. On the other hand, in Argentina, rich people were investing in agriculture. They raised cattle, then sold the meat, and bought industrialized goods. In the short term, it made sense because if they tried to make these other things, such as clothes or tools, they would just go bankrupt because there was no way they could compete with the Americans or British. But in the long term, we've seen that this has led to these countries being poorer than their industrialized counterparts. Just think about it. Imagine you're a millionaire in Angola and you made a lot of money in agriculture. You're going to take that money and you're going to spend it in two things: in goods made in China and in services, such as like waiters or hairdressers. These waiters and hairdressers are then going to spend in goods made in China. On the other hand, if you're a millionaire in China, you're going to spend your money in goods made in China and services in China. They are then going to take that money and spend it in goods in China and services in China. So the money is going to stay in China and it's going to keep Chinese economy very strong. Over time, this is going to enable the Chinese economy to accumulate more and more capital. So while in China, the money stays in China, and that's called a multiplier effect, and enables them to accumulate more and more capital and become even more productive. In Mozambique, the money quickly flees the country and doesn't give them the opportunity to accumulate capital and become more productive, be it in fishing or in industry. And why is China industrialized and Mozambique is not? Well, there are lots of factors, but a very important one, and that doesn't always work, but it works for many countries. Some countries decide to put policies that help their industry, but have a cost. One kind of cost is putting tariffs on foreign goods. People hate those because they have to spend more for worse national goods. But in the long term, it helps their industry to develop. There are many other factors that influence this, and I'm not going to delve too deep into this, but let it rest that it has a lot to do with public decision. But don't be fooled. The only way to escape poverty, and you can see that in the examples of South Korea and China and Taiwan, is through industry. There is no country that has ever escaped poverty sustainably and has really developed to become a middle income or a rich country through agriculture and mining. There are some countries that people sometimes use an example, so Ireland or New Zealand, but the first case is a very small country and it can piggyback off other countries' wealth, something that larger countries such as Mozambique cannot do. Or in the case of New Zealand or Australia, for example, those are not really countries that are not industrialized. They have a very important industry. New Zealand, for example, has a very important high-tech food industry, such as whey protein. That's not something that you can make in Mozambique. It's something that is very niche and requires a lot of technology and scale to do. There is another factor that makes countries more productive, which is investment in infrastructure. That usually comes from the government, and it usually works very well, and it's pretty straightforward. Some countries invest more in infrastructure, while other countries invest less. And also, countries that have started to invest in infrastructure earlier have been able to accumulate more roads, more ports, more railways, and so on and so forth. Let's answer the question. Why are rich countries rich and poor countries poor? Well, rich countries have more capital. They have better tools, so they produce more. And why have they accumulated more capital? Well, because they have invested in more lucrative sectors. And why haven't other countries invested in these sectors? Because they're high risk. So because of this, usually the countries that have invested in these sectors have done so led by the state. Location is also important. If you're near rich countries, you're going to be able to sell to them with a lot of ease, and so you're going to earn more money than if you're close to poor countries. That's why you don't find any Switzerland in the middle of Africa or a Mozambique in the middle of Europe. And last but not least is investment in infrastructure. Some countries have invested more in ports and roads and railways than others. This helps economic activity to be less costly. This is my channel, the Iperoig Forum. I'm going to be talking about economics, society, history, and my dear passion, Brazil. So that's it. That was my first video here in my YouTube channel. Please subscribe and like, and I promise to bring more high quality content to you in the future.